Shabbat Shalom once again on this beautiful Sabbath day. We have the great opportunity to hear from the great Kohan, Abel Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Please be seated. You have your books of Yahweh. Please turn over to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 8. Chapter 8. Very recently, I asked a 4-year-old future priest, I said, "Son, teach me something that will last forever." He said, "The house of Yahweh is the pillar and everlasting strength of Yahweh." I said, "Son, thank you for teaching me. I appreciate that. I will remember that as long as Yahweh grants me the breath of life. But out of the mouth of babes, strength by you is ordained." In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 8, and notice verse 4 and 5, please keep in mind that the great house of Yahweh is given this great authority to bring forth righteousness. Notice the word of Yahweh. Where the word of the king is, there is power. So who dare say to him, "What are you doing?" The voice of the seventh Malach of Yahweh is the inspiration of Yahweh. I want you to write that down. He will teach all of us the power of mercy and the power of forgiveness. The power to bring forth life, peace, healing, health, and restoration to all of Yahweh's creation. That's that word power there. The power of mercy and the power of forgiveness will be taught to all the called out ones of the house of Yahweh. The house of Yahweh says to all the inhabitants of the earth, "Come out of the rudiments of the world. He who sins, let him sin no more. He who stole, let him steal no more." If you desire salvation, if you want salvation, then you must come to the great house of Yahweh, to the chosen branch, the great righteous, faithful, and zealous priests of Yahweh, the great Kohan Yisrayl Abel Hawkins. Remember what we've been taught? We see Yahweh when we see the great priest Yisrayl Hawkins. If we agree with Yahweh, Yeshua, and the chosen branch, the one that Yahweh has sent by the mouth of his inspired holy prophets, then your buckets will overflow with water. Your buckets will overflow with water. Your buckets will overflow with righteousness. That's what the law says. I want to share with all of you what I have been taught for the last 23 years in the great house of Yahweh. I'll just read these things, and if at all possible, if you could write it down, that's fine. But these are the words of the greatest teacher in the world, the mighty Malach, the mighty priest, the mighty judge of Yahweh, who will judge according to all the judgments of Yahweh. It's the greatest honor in the world to be called by the greatest being in the world. The house of Yahweh is given the authority to bring forth righteousness. I have been prepared to bring forth righteousness. I cannot bring forth unrighteousness. This prophesied work is prophesied to bring forth righteousness. What we practice is more important than what we preach. Together, we can achieve peace. You agree with that, brethren? Together, the house of Yahweh can achieve everlasting peace, joy, and love. Let Yahweh work with you and let his spirit grow in you. The scriptures teach from beginning to end that these laws will lead a person to perfection if he will listen to them, if he will learn them, and put them to use in his everyday life. Get this one. A man's true character is measured by his obedience to the laws of Yahweh. The house of Yahweh stands alone in the wilderness of God worshippers. Unity in Yahweh's laws of righteousness tethers friendship with Yahweh, mankind, and kingdoms eternally. The house of Yahweh is brought out, laid out, and formed, and it will come to pass. Yahweh always honors the words of his prophets. Don't be deceived, only believe all that the prophets have spoken. You agree with that, brethren? Then if you do so, then you agree with Yahweh, Yeshua, and Yahweh's chosen branch in these last days. A lawkeeper is fully in tune and in unity with Yahweh in every way. I've only asked for Yahweh's righteousness and to be called by his name. Yahweh always honors the words of his chosen branch. Write that down. Please write that down. This is reminders. These are reminders that will cause you to grow in righteousness. Yahweh always honors the words of his chosen branch. Ecclesiastes 8 verse 4 again, where the word of the king is, this word king is the Hebrew word malach, the malach of Yahweh. Revelations 10 verse 7, but in the days of the voice of the seventh malach, when he will begin to sound, the great secrets of Yahweh would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. Where the word of the king is, there is power. This power is the power of mercy, the power of forgiveness, the power to bring forth life, health, healing, strength, restoration to all of Yahweh's creation. And that's why Pastor was inspired to write, inspired to teach all of us to come out of the rudiments of the world. What we are leading up to in the next few days is leading up to Yeshua's memorial. And if I could impress deeply on your minds, is that we, collectively speaking, all men, women, and children, that we will be thoroughly fit, ready, and prepared in our hearts, our minds, and our thoughts, our entire body to be completely immersed in the work of Yahweh. Do not serve and work for Yahweh halfway. Let us all serve and work for Yahweh all the way until the job is done. You in agreement with that, brethren? Turn over to Romans chapter 15, verse 29. I admire the words of one of the greatest teachers of righteousness. I want you to remember this and write it down. The way how the house of Yahweh remembers Deuteronomy 6:25, I want you to commit this verse to memory. Romans 15:29, the great apostle Shaul, a mighty priest, a mighty teacher of righteousness, said these words. He was thoroughly convinced and fully persuaded that nothing would be able to cause him to leave the pillar and ground of Yahweh's truth. Highlight it. Highlight this verse. If you haven't already, highlight this verse and write it on your mirror, your kitchen mirror, and let this be a forever reminder to the called out ones of the house of Yahweh. Notice his words. He said, but I am sure that when I come to you, I will come in the full measure of the blessing of the message of Yeshua. That's the whole purpose. The whole purpose of life is to create mankind in the image and the likeness and the beautiful character of Yahweh. If any one of us ever desire to become a teacher of righteousness, then you must teach the full measure of the blessings of the message of Yeshua, the strength, the power of Yahweh. Yachanan 3:34 for your notes. For he whom Yahweh has sent speaks the words of Yahweh, the law and the prophets. For Yahweh does not give his spirit sparingly to the one whom he has sent. 1 Corinthians 1:24. Go one page over. 1 Corinthians 1:24. I just want you to see that before I get into the heart of this sermon. But to those who are called to the great house of Yahweh at Abel, Yeshua Messiah is the power of Yahweh and the wisdom of Yahweh. Use the wisdom of Yahweh in everything you do. Can you remember that, brethren? Use the wisdom of Yahweh in everything you do. When you leave the room, you're the last one out of that room, shut the lights. We've been taught by the greatest teacher in the world. Use the wisdom of Yahweh in everything you do, in your work, in your daily work, in your communication, all your relationships between husband and wife, your travel, your expenses. Use the wisdom of Yahweh in everything you do. Yeshua Messiah is the power of Yahweh and the wisdom of Yahweh. Turn over to Romans chapter 10, verses 4 and 5. Romans chapter 10, verses 4 and 5. Notice the word of Yahweh. For Yeshua is the ultimate result. The ultimate result. He was a contributor. He was a cause of the growth of his righteous disciples, his teachers. For Yeshua is the ultimate result of keeping the law unto righteousness for everyone who believes. This is the work of Yahweh, that you believe into the one whom Yahweh has sent by the mouth of his prophets. If you agree with Yahweh's prophets, then you agree with Yahweh, Yeshua, and the one whom Yahweh has sent. Notice in verse 5, for Moshe writes about the righteousness that is through the law, that the man who does these things will live by them. Remember, use the wisdom of Yahweh in everything we do. Go over to verse 13. Verse 13. Let's go to verse 13. For whoever calls with the name of Yahweh will be delivered, will be saved. Salvation is only offered to those who choose to be a part of Yahweh's everlasting family. Whoever will call with the name of Yahweh will be delivered in this time of destruction. How then can they call upon him in whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in him of whom they had not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? Notice that. Who has believed our report? To whom is the arm of Yahweh revealed? I do want to encourage everyone leading up to Yeshua's memorial to read Isaiah chapter 53 and ponder and meditate on it, if at all possible, on the Sabbath and in the next few days. And how can they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the message of peace, who bring glad tidings of righteous things. You know, the whole earth is cursed, as the future priest, the great future priest of Yahweh, was explaining, giving the explanation of the defilement of the earth. Because of the sins of mankind has reached its peak. They have pushed aside Yahweh's laws, and the laws of Yahweh is no longer taught in the schools. That's why you see lawlessness, recklessness, violence, and bullying taking place in the schools. We have teachers of righteousness, the teachers of righteousness ready to go into these schools to teach the peaceful solution, character education program in all the schools throughout the earth, throughout the United States. But notice here how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the message of peace, who bring glad tidings of righteous things. But they have not all obeyed the message. For Isaiah says, Yahweh, who has believed our report? And that's what occurred when the women of Yada in Jerusalem, when the great prophet, let's go to Jeremiah chapter 44 and verse 16. I just want to point something out. That's what took place there. It says, concerning the word that you have spoken to us in the name of Yahweh, we will not listen to you. Yahweh pleads with all the inhabitants of the earth. Humble yourself and come to the great house of Yahweh. if you desire salvation, if you want salvation, if you desire Yahweh's righteousness, Yahweh has given this great invitation to the inhabitants of the earth to be a part of His everlasting staff, this administration of an everlasting priesthood that will be built here in these last days. Notice here, so then faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the word of Yahweh. What is the faith? The faith tells you what to do and what not to do, but it's up to you to do it. We know indeed that the laws of Yahweh is perfect if one agrees with the law, taking it to himself to use. The title of this sermon I want to bring out here this morning is "The Teachers of Righteousness Becomes a Lawgiver Like Yahweh Himself." The teachers of righteousness becomes a lawgiver like Yahweh Himself. Remember what we just covered in Romans chapter 15, 29. But I am sure that when I come to you, I will come in the full measure of the blessing of the message of Yahshua. He will not add or take away from the plan of Yahweh, the plan of righteousness and perfection. The teachers of righteousness, he or she will be the first to do and practice righteousness. They will become a promoter, a builder, a supporter of the everlasting righteousness of Yahweh. That's what a teacher of righteousness is. He's a promoter, a builder, a supporter of the great kingdom of Yahweh. They will teach the full measure of the blessings of the message of Yahshua. The word lawgiver is word number 2710. A lawgiver is a prescriber of Yahweh's laws to the people, to impress deeply in the hearts and minds and thoughts of the people the great wisdom of Yahweh. A lawgiver is an engraver of Yahweh's laws to the people. And that's what our beloved overseer is. He's an engraver. He's a lawgiver, the father of the multitude of nations, the father of truth, who teaches the everlasting righteousness of Yahweh. But that's what a lawgiver is, to mark out, to engrave, so that the laws, the teachings of the laws will forever be in your memory. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews chapter 1. Beginning with verse 1 to 3, and then we'll go down to verse 8 and 9. Yahweh, who at various times and in different ways spoke in times past to our fathers through His holy prophets. Notice that. His prophets, the great prophets of Yahweh. 2 Chronicles 20:20 for your notes. Believe in Yahweh your Father, and you shall be established. Believe His prophets, and you shall succeed. Has in these last days spoken to us through His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, for whom He also made the world. Who being the reflection, notice here, Yahshua, the righteous, the faithful, righteous, and majestic high priest over the house of Yahweh, notice here, is the reflection of the perfection of Yahweh and the representation that which was spoken of by Yahweh through the law and the prophets. Remember, Yahshua is the ultimate result of keeping Yahweh's laws and doing righteousness. Through the law and the prophets, when He had purged sin, sat down on the right hand of Yahweh on high. Notice that in Hebrews 10 verse 14. For by one offering, you can write that off to your notes, for by one offering He has perfected forever those who are sanctified. Go down to verse 8 and 9. We've got to remember the plan of Yahweh. The perfected plan of Yahweh is a forever plan. It's a forever plan of righteousness. But to the Son, notice here, He says, the throne of your Father is forever and ever. In Psalms 89 and verse 35, all the way to 37, we saw Yahweh's faithful witness in the sky, the sighting of the new moon. But to the Son, He says, the throne of your Father is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. When I want to just refresh your memory concerning use the wisdom of Yahweh in everything you do. Wisdom is the application, the performance of Yahweh's laws. That's what wisdom is. If you apply the law and perform Yahweh's laws, it is accounted to you as wisdom. Notice in verse 9, you have loved righteousness. Remember, the overflowing of righteousness will come from the great house of Yahweh at Abel. You have loved righteousness and hated iniquity. He who steals, let him steal no more. You have loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore, Yahweh your Father has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions, your fellow heirs, Turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32, beginning with verse 1. Notice the word of Yahweh. You know, the word of Yahweh will awaken every cell, the trillions of cells within the human body. It will stir the people of Yahweh to action. It will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers in respect and in admiration. That's what about the teaching. Notice the word of Yahweh here. Listen, O heavens, and I will speak. Remember, the voice of the seventh Malach of Yahweh is the inspiration of Yahweh. Listen, O heavens, and I will speak. Hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. The words of my mouth. The words of my mouth. Yahweh always honors the words of his prophets. Yahweh always honors the words of his chosen branch. Let my teachings fall like rain. Let my words, the overflowing, yes, the teachers of righteousness will overflow. Their buckets will overflow with water, as the book of Numbers mentioned there. Let my teachings fall like rain. Let my words descend like dew. Let them fall like showers on the new grass, like abundant rain on plants. Notice that? The beautification of Yahweh's creation. For I will proclaim Yahweh's great name. And that has always been the work of the one whom Yahweh has sent and his seed, to proclaim the greatness of Yahweh's beautiful and everlasting name, the everlasting name of Yahweh. Notice here in verse 4, he is the rock. Yahweh is the rock. He is the strength, the power of life that brings forth life. His works are perfect. Yahweh's works are perfect. Yahweh's ways are justice indeed. He is the Father of truth and does no wrong. Upright and just is he. Go over to Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49. We covered that a lot as the priest of Yahweh has been teaching us and as Pastor has been teaching us. But in Genesis chapter 49, verses 10 and 11, Genesis 49, verses 10 and 11, notice the word of Yahweh. It says, the scepter will not depart from Yada, nor a ruling staff, a lawgiver. A lawgiver, remember, a teacher. The teachers of righteousness are an engraver, a prescriber of Yahweh's laws to the people. The scepter will not depart from Yada, nor a ruling staff, lawgiver from between his feet, until he comes to whom tribute belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. The obedience of the nations. Remember that. Verse 11, tethering his donkey to the vine, tethering his donkey's coat to the choicest branch, he will wash his garments in wine, he will wash his robes in the blood of grapes. Turn over to Genesis 35 and verse 11. This is a prophecy what will take place, which is taking place here in these last days. This is a promise that was given to the great patriarch Israel. This is a promise here to the great prophet of Yahweh here. In verse 11, Genesis 35, verse 11, and Yahweh said to him, I am Yahweh, the Almighty Father of your fathers. Be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will come from your body, from the loins of this body. Notice that, a nation and a community of nations. That's the promotion. That's what a teacher of righteousness is, a promoter, a builder, a supporter of the everlasting righteousness of Yahweh. Okay. one last scripture. Turn over to Revelations chapter 3, and beginning with verse 7. Revelations 3, verse 7. Please keep in mind that the great house of Yahweh is the tree of life. The house of Yahweh is the pillar and everlasting strength of Yahweh, as that future priest taught me a few weeks ago. But notice here, and to the Malach of the congregation of the house of Yahweh in Philadelphia write these things, says, He who is holy, He who is true, He who has the key of David, He who opens and no man shuts, and shuts and no man opens. I know your works. Yahweh knows the works of the one whom He has sent. Together we can achieve peace, as Pastor said. I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, and no man can shut it. For you have a little strength, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Behold, I give out of all those of the assemblage of the accuser, who preach themselves to be those who worship Yahweh, and they are not, but they attempt to deceive by falsehood. You know, brethren, there's a lot of crackerjack preachers out there who speak with a forked tongue. They don't know how to teach righteousness or the full measure of the blessing of the message of Yahshua. I will appoint them for the purpose of worshiping in the presence of your footstool, and they will understand that I love you. Remember what Yahweh says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness and everlasting mercy, I have drawn you to my house. That's what Pastor is teaching us, the power of mercy and the power of forgiveness. Like that woman who came to Yeshua and sat at his feet and learned and grow in righteousness. Unless we humble ourselves as little children, to be humble, submissive, and teachable to the one whom Yahweh has sent, then you put the axe to the root of the tree to your own self. Let me finish off here. Because you have kept the word of my patience, I also will keep you from the hour of temptation, which will come upon all the world to test those who dwell upon the earth. Yochanan 16:33 for your notes. And Yeshua spoke these things to them, saying, In me you will have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But be of great courage. I have overcome the world. I know you can overcome the world, brethren. Every one of you. Yahweh knows that. We can do it if we can just set our hearts and our minds. Use the wisdom of Yahweh in everything you do, and you'll never go wrong, brethren. Never go wrong. To test those who dwell upon the earth, behold, I come quickly. Hold fast that which you have, that no man take your crown of joy, of rejoicing in the house of Yahweh. He who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the house of Yahweh. A pillar is one who will bring forth life, strength, and peace to the inhabitants of the earth. I will make a pillar in the house of my father, and he will never go out of it. And I will write upon him the name of my father and the name of the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my Father, newly named. He who has an ear, he who has understanding, he who desires the salvation of Yahweh, he who desires Yahweh's righteousness, then let him hear, let him come to the one whom Yahweh has sent. And the overflowing of righteousness will overflow. Your buckets will overflow with righteousness, whatever you do. That's the promise of Yahweh. Yahweh guarantees His word. It's a lifetime warranty that will never run dry. All the religions of the world, they're like wells without water. But here at the great house of Yahweh, it's an everlasting well that will replenish itself over and over and over again. May Yahweh bless your understanding. Everyone, please stand. I'll turn the services over to my beloved brother and fellow priest, the great Kohan Zephaniah Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Please be seated. We have the news again, which is continuing to prove the prophecies right, of course. And the first story we have is autism. They've studied autism, and they found in the last 6 years it's doubled. And this is a real significant story because really what they're discovering is that the whole world is crazy And the woman in the story says, and I think she's a mathematician, because she says, what does this mean? Does it mean when my grandchildren are born, every other person will have autism? And she's right. If you just run these numbers, that is actually correct. And then if 6 years later, everyone will have autism. But that's where they're going with this. And then we have a story about a jet pilot that goes crazy. You've probably seen this, the JetBlue pilot that went crazy. But one thing they say in this story is it's the first time a pilot has been charged with interfering with his own flight if they charge him. And this is another one of these firsts that we're going to see a lot of. And the other interesting thing is the class of person that this is. You know, this is one of the people that would be ruling the world, these pilots, this type of person. It's like the scripture talks about, you know, as with the passenger, so with the pilot, as with the buyer, so with the seller. It's basically everyone. Everyone is being affected, and as with the person who has his finger on the nuclear bomb button, and that's what it ultimately boils down to. Gas prices, $3.92, and the Saudi prince says there's no rational reason for these prices, and this is because they're controlling them. Violence in Spain, and then protests on the Gaza. So everything is going according to prophecy. Nothing is getting any more peaceful. So let's play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy. Katan, our Savior said that we would know we're living in the last days when we see an increase in earthquakes, wars, disease epidemics, and the first article proves that the prophecy is being fulfilled and that we're living in this time period.
That's right, Jeff. Not earthquakes or wars, but disease epidemics. In fact, in a recent report released by the CDC, they estimate that 1 in 88 children has a disorder on the autism spectrum. Now, these numbers are up 23% from just 2 years ago, with the rate for boys with the disorder climbing and currently at 1 in 54. This latest report from the CDC suggests that autism is, in their words, epidemic.
Dr. Gary Goldstein of the Kennedy Krieger Institute, who studies the disorder, said of the recent report from the CDC, "That's a pretty enormous number, and I was sort of surprised that it's continuing to increase at this rate of 20%. In fact, these new numbers indicate an enormous situation, that the rate of autism has doubled in the last 6 years."
Dr. Colleen Boyle of the CDC, who oversaw the study, says, no matter what the number is, one thing is for certain, and that's more children are being identified with autism. In fact, in 2008, the CDC conducted a study of over 337,000 8-year-olds in 14 states. Now, what they were looking for in their studies were medical records and educational records for diagnosis and symptoms of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD.
ASD. ASD refers to a group of symptoms including a profound inability to communicate, mental retardation, and other developmental disorders from mild to severe. The diagnosis of autism can be complicated and subjective. The CDC says this increase is due in part to increased awareness, but the cause of autism to them remains a mystery.
Interesting. Researchers say that some of the clues to understanding the disorder may be found in studying families. One particular family, who has a now 12-year-old son, was diagnosed with autism at the age of 5. Now, as a result, their daughter has been monitored since she was born, and so far, she's a typical 3-year-old, no symptoms of autism there. But with such a dramatic rise in cases of the disorder, the mother is very anxious for answers, of course.
One of her concerns, she stated, was, when I have grandchildren, will it be 1 in 2? Regarding their son who is doing better, he went through extensive therapy in specialized schools before he saw improvement.
Jeff, so the question is, what are scientists and doctors doing in response to these numbers? Well, next year, new guidelines are expected to change the way the definition of autism is read, which could drastically reduce the number of children given the diagnosis, particularly children with mild autistic traits.
So, Catan, they're not really doing anything about autism. They're just changing the standard so it's looking like there's less children with autism.
Oh, yeah. Kind of ignored, and maybe the problem will go away.
Some disturbing news for anyone planning to fly. JetBlue Flight 191 had to make an emergency landing by its co-pilot after the captain of the plane lost his ability to think clearly. Ranting and raving about threats linked to Iran and Afghanistan, he had to be subdued by flight attendants and passengers mid-flight.
Clay Osborne, the 49-year-old JetBlue pilot, had 12 years captain's experience, but when his co-pilot noticed the abnormal behavior and physical distress he realized he had to do something or else someone would get hurt. Osborne left the cockpit, and while gone, the co-pilot requested another pilot who was passenger on Flight 191 to come to the cockpit to help fly the plane. When Osborne returned, he found the cockpit door locked, which intensified the situation. The co-pilot then gave orders to the crew to restrain their captain. While some passengers helped, others had to be calmed, fearful that their flight had been hijacked.
Lee Cohen from CBS News interviewed some of the passengers who were relieved to be safe on the ground after the horrifying ordeal. One passenger described what it was like when the captain returned to the cockpit. He said he's banging on the door, yelling at the first officer, "Bring the throttle to idle, bring it to idle, we're going down, we're all going to die." Still quoting here, "Pray to Jesus, open this goddamn door."
Yeah, it seems like that had to be scary. A second passenger described the moments before he decided to take action. This man, in quoting him, he said, "So the stewardess got a hold of him, but then he got close to the door, the outside door. So I said, I can't let this guy open the door up here."
Flight 191 had to make an emergency landing in Amarillo, Texas. There, Osborne was finally taken into custody, and the plane was screened for explosives as a precautionary measure. However, government databases determined that Osborne had no known association with any terrorist groups. Now, Catan, if the pilot is charged, it would be the first time ever that a pilot was charged with interfering with his own flight.
Wow, a lot of firsts. Now, from sky-high chaos to sky-high gas prices, we turn it over to our correspondent, Larry McGee, for an update on what the oil situation is. Larry?
Thanks, Catan. The hot topic in politics this week is rising gas prices. The national average hit $3.92 this week, and that is an 18% increase for just this month alone. The question is now becoming, at what point do high gas prices begin to undermine the economic recovery? In an effort to answer that question, CBS business correspondent Anthony Mason found himself at a rather unusual art exhibit located in New York City's theater district, where at an empty lot, a 3-ton rig suddenly appeared this month, much to the surprise of many Manhattan residents. The art exhibit was actually intended to encourage people to ask questions. And with gas prices $4 a gallon, questions are exactly what business owners like Andy Anastasio are beginning to have. Anastasio, who owns a trucking company which runs over 100 sedans and trucks, says that gas prices are one of his company's biggest concerns. And as prices continue to rise, the price that his business pays is that it begins to erode his company's profits. So at what point do things begin to really break down? One analyst believes that $5 a gallon would definitely be enough to tilt the American economy into at least a consumer recession, although he doesn't foresee that actually occurring. One reason is that when crude oil prices become so high, demand starts to plummet. He went on to say, if crude oil prices get so high that the bubble bursts, what we'll then see is prices collapse, or at least drop $10 to $25 a barrel, like what we saw in July of 2008, where crude actually reached over $145 a barrel, but by August, it had plunged to over $121. On the upside, oil fell below $103 a barrel today, which is a 6-week low after the Saudi Arabian oil minister commented that his country could very easily produce more oil, and there's absolutely no reason for gas prices to be so high. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Baton Jeff, back to you.
Katana, as if the economy wasn't bad enough, these high gas prices are really starting to hurt the general public as well as businesses.
That's right, and if gas prices weren't enough to hurt people, in Barcelona, Spain, violent protests have been underway around the country as the government has passed relaxed labor laws, making it easier for employers to fire their employees and cut their wages. Now, 2 unions called for its members to protest these measures, and the people responded to the call with fierce actions.
Well, we have more fighting in the Middle East this week. At least one person is reported killed as Israeli police used tear gas and water cannons against Palestinian protesters as they mark the annual event called Land Day. Now, this day marks the death of 6 Arabs killed by police in demonstrations against a land seizure in Israel back in 1976. There's also been unrest at various checkpoints in the West Bank.
Reports indicate Israeli police have pushed back protesters further into the Palestinian city of Ramallah. They formed barriers to stop protesters coming any closer to some of their checkpoints. Now, throughout the day, ambulances transporting injured people have been going to and fro. Up to 130 people have been wounded across the West Bank, indicating that the violence is ongoing. Among the injured at Kalandia was one high-profile Palestinian legislator.
Now, the Army and police have been using water cannons. They have also been using a vehicle that, when it sprays, it emits an awful-smelling liquid in an effort to try to disperse the crowd. A second crowd-control device was used that emits very high-frequency sounds, was also used against the demonstrators.
Our clashes are continuing in Jerusalem as well, and the police there are on high alert. Not just any alert, but the highest alert. So, Jeff, we have diseases, confusion, oppression, and wars. All the perfect ingredients for a system that is getting ready to collapse on itself. But for more understanding on this, stay tuned as Yisrayl Hawkins explains these news articles and how they relate to Bible prophecies. For YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thanks for joining us.
Everyone, please stand. The greatest teacher in the world, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins! Shalom, everyone! Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. I was told we had people here trying to start the feast already. People from out of town. Whew, wonderful. I guess the strongest place that right now that Satan's face is shining is that last news clip we saw there. In Yahweh's house, Yahweh set a table for us in the presence of the enemies. Praise Yahweh. True peace found here. By the way, this will put a smile on your face. Say cheese. Cheese, you know. we got our original cheese sticks back. Plenty of them. Praise Yahweh. Let's see, they did a pretty great job on that meal this morning, announcing it. I noticed the great Kohan Shaul. Don't forget to look up. Not while you're driving, you know, if you're out on the highway, but, you know, be careful walking too. But now this week, Yahweh, this was the 30th. This was yesterday.
the boys at the priestly school, they came outside and they all saw Yahweh's name right over the campground. In the clouds. In the clouds, they went to screaming and jumping up and down and run back inside, got the teachers, and one of the teachers got a picture. so we got it written. The day, I believe it was the day before that, they saw the word pray in the clouds over the sanctuary, and that's when the news went out that Yahshua was asking everybody to pray. And we went on the radio and told everyone this. They all called me to find out what for. We don't want to tell what for, just pray. You know all the things to ask for. Pray for the sick, pray for the protection of Yahweh's work and house. That last article you saw, now I don't know exactly, but one day, I think it was one day last week, one of the teachers went home for dinner and turned the internet on to get the news, and it had the news about Israel, and they showed all of these tanks, and then she looked in the clouds above the tanks, and there was a picture of the face. Now, she didn't need a camera. It was easy to print that one out. So we have elders assigned, priests assigned to bring these pictures during the feast. No one can write in the clouds except Yahweh, and He's given that power, that authority to Yahshua, and I think you're going to see a lot of it now. The sign of the Son of Man in heaven. The great Kohan Shaul is going to bring more than this during the feast. Don't miss that sermon. There's a lot on this right here that you need to know, and of course it will get better as we get closer into the redemption and the going up to receive authority from Yahweh. That's what we're looking forward to, and especially this feast. Praise Yahweh. Now, this is going to be a working feast. Of course, we've got a lot of things that needs to be done in preparation, and so if you want to, well, you really need to do it. Just find a job. We have jobs for everyone, and even if you're in a wheelchair. Speaking of wheelchairs, the other day, one of the first members of the House of Yahweh, she was in a wheelchair, and I stopped to say shalom to her, and she said, I said, your face is different than it was the last time I saw you, and it's shining. You got a great complexion. She said, I've been drinking whey. She said, since I started that, well, she said, my foot is almost well now, because she had trouble with swelling and diabetes, I guess, and different other things collected from the world. But she said her foot was almost well now, and the swelling is going down. And I said, was that since you started drinking whey? And she says, yes. So remember these things. It's very helpful. Praise Yahweh. Yahweh's way. Yahweh's way. But now the feast work, we're going to have, and check with the South Office, of course, and we'll have a man that will assign you after he talks to you and find out your skills. And, he'll assign you to a person, a place to work. or create a new job for you, one of the two. And the women will do the same thing. If you're a woman, they'll show you where you're needed the most, and we'll find a place for everyone to work. Praise Yahweh. Now, we've been talking about the face of Satan and the face of Yahweh and for a few weeks now, and that woman, she put on at last the face of Yahweh and was pulled out of deep dark sin, and of course she changed instantly when she saw that the prophecies were actually coming true, and she rejoiced greatly in this, as I'm seeing others rejoicing now. And I see a lot of that woman here today and a lot of the Yeshua here today that wasn't in the beginning of the work that Yahweh started. If you could see what's going on in my mind now, and how we have fought over the years, to get it, to get the sin out of the house of Yahweh, because everyone came here with deep-rooted sins, and we were probably the furthest thing from Yeshua and this woman as the examples that Yahweh wants in His kingdom, but slowly and surely they're coming out, and the wrinkles are disappearing, and the spots and the blemishes, and we've seen it year after year. This growth, this great growth, and in spite of the persecution, you've come through it, and you've become stronger and more closely knit together in unity with Yahweh and each other. And I see this. I've seen it now for 40 years. Some have been struck down with sickness, and they're still enduring. And that's what Yahweh wants, of course. And still trying, still working in the work, and proving themselves, and very joyous, wearing a smile doing it. Now, what I'm trying to do is get you to see the face of Satan, of course, and the face of Yahweh together, and see the comparison, because we've got to, the men have got to be like Yeshua. The women have got to see this example of this of the woman, and become like her, because we were all sinners, and we've got to get this sin totally out of our life, and we've got to humble ourselves. And this was the biggest thing I saw in her. I've seen haughty women, that it's a continual struggle when you're living with one, and I've seen haughty, rebellious men, and that's a continuous struggle. It's a headache. It causes misery and hatred, hard feelings all the time. And these are the things that won't be allowed in Yahweh's kingdom. And He's given us these examples, and now He's bringing it to light, to where you will actually see this in action, and we're getting closer, because Yahweh is actually making contact with us, direct contact, and He's never done that before. But now, the face of Satan that we saw here, the last film there, and fighting and killing and bombing each other, and this article, it pretty well lines it out here. It says, according to the German magazine Der Spiegel, the European Union, that's a member of the quartet now, the European Union, the EU. United States, Russia, the EU, and the UN, or the quartet that was teamed up in 2002. Didn't exist until then, but they formed this quartet to bring peace. Well, according to the newspaper, the European Union is the most important weapons exporter to Saudi Arabia. Now, that's just one they're exporting these weapons to. Of all UN member states, France comes first with euro. Now, here's $2,000 million. $2,000 million. It's actually over that, but I want you to get that 2,000. Think of a million and then think of $2,000 million. And remember the scripture that the great priest Timothy gave you, saying the love for money is a root of all evil. and you will see that's part of it. But now, this is just the love for money is the carried on the string, carried on the stick that led the mule from one end of the field to the other, plowing the field for the farmer. And Satan says you can have this great wealth, if you just follow me. That's what she told Yeshua. You can have all the kingdoms of the earth here if you'll just follow me. And well, that's what she's telling all the preachers, and of course they're preaching it. Be like the gods, Yahweh. You can be a son of God, a son of a God, or a son of the Lord, but you have to put on this face of Satan to do it. Well, this is the face of Satan, and of course the European Union is the most important weapons exporter to Saudi Arabia. Of all EU member states, France comes first with the 2,000 million of exports. That's in the euro. In 2010, Italy, you know where Rome sits, right? Italy is in second place with the euro of 435 million in sales to Saudi Arabia. That's just to Saudi Arabia. Great Britain is 328 million. If you remember when I spoke at the UN at the Peace Conference, and the man named Bawa Jain, which his name in Hebrew meant gate opener, and he told me at that time that the nuclear sales were like 850 million a year. And he says, there's no way you can stop it. And, well, I said, well, Yahweh has a way. And that plan, that work is going to come about, but not until 4/5 of the earth's population is wiped out to show man what his way will bring. This magazine, German magazine, says by arming the Saudi kingdom, the member states of the European Union are breaking prevailing EU rules or laws regulating the exports of weapons. Notes this Der Spiegel magazine. The magazine quotes the relevant section of the legislation of non-proliferation and disarmament titled Security-Related Export Control to Military Equipment, which states, here's what it states, and this is the law they're breaking, their own law that they're breaking. Member states have once again shown their determination to prevent the export of military technology and equipment, which might be used for undesirable purposes such as internal repression, or international aggression or contribute to the regional instability. It is worth noting, he says, in this regard, that a large quantity of the weapons sold to Saudi Arabia by EU member states has ended up in the hands of Libyan, Syrian rebels, including terrorists, thus largely contributing to fueling international aggression and regional instability. Now, you've got to remember this, because you can see the overall plan of Satan here that is prevailing, and what they're doing for the love of money, the carrot on the stick. They are actually selling these things, and then under the guidance of the UN also, or the quartet. We'll see that strongly later. Under the guidance of the quartet, they're building up something that requires an intervention of a stronger nation to go in and settle the matter. So they're furnishing the fuel to start the terrorism, to start the Al-Qaedas, as they want to blame, to start the Al-Qaedas, and of course, then whoever it is that they want to send in, which is a member of the quartet, to settle this matter, they have to go in and take over the nation in order to settle the matter, and then, of course, they get to collect the wealth from that nation once again. According to the Finnan Cunningham, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, in particular, were also instrumental in driving events in Syria and in Libya, providing financial support, weapons, covert fighters, and student diplomatic backing for the self-styled transitional councils. So they're actually training people, furnishing the weapons, training the people to go in and start the trouble, so they can, of course, have an excuse. And this is what they haven't found so far. In Iran, they haven't found a great enough excuse to go in and take the land. But according to the prophecies, they're given authority to do so, and this is the buildup that we're seeing day after day towards that overall goal of Satan that we'll see in Scripture. Interest of the U.S. and NATO, let me read that last part again. Let's see, serving the strategic interest of the U.S. and NATO in the Middle East, serving it. They're doing this to serve the U.S. and NATO in the Middle East. Moreover, Saudi Arabia has also channeled weapons and financial support to Al-Qaeda. Saudi Arabia, who is getting its weapons now from EU and other places, other members, are channeling these, and they know that this took place, according to this German magazine, to Al-Qaeda. Affiliated brigades in the Middle East, Asia, and North Africa. Yes, we're having trouble in North Africa, if you're keeping up on it. Maybe we can get a news clip to show that next week. The German magazine notes that the global weapons trade is booming and has increased by 24% over the last 5 years. 24%. Along with this, of course, sickness and disease, as you also saw. That one little thing, autism disease, that's striking many children, that's just not even the tip of the iceberg. That's what's going on now in health-wise throughout the whole world. In a bitter irony, now get this, in a bitter irony, the world's top weapons traders, U.S., Russia, UN, EU, and UN. Isn't that something? And this magazine, the German magazine, is actually printing this. In a bitter irony, the world's top weapons traders, U.S., Russia, Britain, France, China, now China is not, but the others are the countries designated under the UN Charter to preserve peace. We got the fox in charge of the chicken house, you see it? And of course he's building it up to where they can raid this chicken house. Namely, as permanent members of the UN Security Council. In 2010, the war business reached $1.6 trillion. It's over $1.5 trillion, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Now, I want you to go over to Revelation 6 and get this face of Satan right here, because authority was given to them. Nothing is going on by accident in today's world. You have two superpowers working. One of them is Yahweh, bringing his plan to pass. The other one is Satan, trying to destroy the plan of Yahweh. And she has a scheme to do so. Yeshua told us this, and told us that if she succeeded, then the law would disappear. The law of peace and righteousness would actually disappear. Well, here in Revelation 6 and verse 8, if you notice authority here, I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him that sat upon it was Death. And the grave, Sheol the grave, followed with him, and power, that is authority was given to them over the fourth part of the earth. That word power there, it means authority. It was given to them over a fourth part of the earth. Now, this says they were limited to that fourth part of the earth. They didn't want it in Canada or the United States. They didn't want it in certain other countries. But over that fourth part of the earth, as we see in another place, in and around the great river Euphrates, is where they have the authority to take out, depopulate the earth, and of course take over that wealth. But notice the authority is given to them. That is, this quartet that you see mentioned back here in the first few verses of chapter 6. The fourth part of the earth, to kill with war, with hunger, and with sickness and disease, the same under the authority of the beast of the earth. Well, he's speaking about the beast, and like the woman, they're shown somewhere else in the Holy Scriptures. And, of course, it points them out and shows you exactly who they are, where they came from, the 12 tribes they came from. If you go back to Daniel 7, he's the best one here to show. It was shown earlier than he. It was shown in fact, the kingdom that was given to Moshe, the plan of Yahweh that was given to Moshe, an altar of prayer for all people and an altar of slaughter that points out the four horns, which we're seeing here, and that's what they're named later, that Yahweh is going to cut off and cast down, because death and fighting and wars will end. But you see here in chapter 7 of Daniel, who paints a picture of the last days up to the two witnesses. And he saw the two witnesses, and the books were closed until the end time for the rest or the finishing of the work of Yahweh. Now get in your mind that the finishing of the work of Yahweh, the finishing of this is to bring a remnant of people to perfection. Now, he has a perfect example and is given unto us in these last days, and this is the only time that it was ever given, in fact. But Yahshua was given as he lived it, and he became the perfect example. And then he went for 2,000 years and judged at the right hand of Yahweh, training for this work, preparing for this work in these last days. If you think it's a simple thing to protect the work in this time of hatred and time of destruction that has been pointed out from the beginning, you know, the trillions of animals that was sacrificed on those 4 horns was represented, of course, mankind, shedding a life for a life for a sin. Sin is death. It brings death. So we have to give a life for that death we spent. Of course, Yahshua now, remember, he is our Lamb. But remember this great work. Yahweh's work is to bring forth and perfect in this time period. We're it. It hasn't been done before. No one's received this power. But we're going to. Yahweh shows the remnant. The remnant will be first. We're the last that will be first to receive this great power, this great authority under Yahshua now, who, remember, all judgment has been given unto me in heaven and earth. So he is the first of many brethren that starts with this remnant that he is leading in these last days, he being a shining example for men, and that woman that he tells you, celebrate her memorial. That means live it. Live it. Live her life. Become her. And men become him. Well, here in chapter 7 now, if you look at verse 3, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea. Well, those 4 great beasts are shown to us in Revelation 6. No, they didn't disappear. They came up and they combined it and made stronger, and Satan made them stronger, getting them ready to destroy mankind. And we see the 4 great beasts, and then he names them. And he shows you what they are. The verse 4 says the first. And then verse 5 says the second, end of the top line. And then verse 6 says then another. That's number 3. And then we see the 4th beast that is the last or 4th member of the quartet that comes up, and he's exceedingly strong. He has more bombs than all the others put together. Who is that? It's the great United States, backed by Britain, who still has control in this country. Even though we had a big war and fought and won the land, they're still controlling the country. And then we see also the Catholic Church here. The Catholic Church. Now, next week, I'm putting together this now for next week, but I got articles coming to show you the great leading power and how this quartet actually receives its power from them. But here we see this quartet formed here, and here we see the weapons sales that makes this great nation so strong, through the forced peace that we're under now, that's bringing oppression, depression, obedience by force, leadership by force. They claim they got rid of the dictators because the dictators, they want to get rid of them because the dictators are causing oppression to the people. And then they get rid of the dictators and they have more oppression than they did before. We're seeing from prophecy and from the news media, looks like, that it's going to get really bad in the United States. The oppression, the dictatorship, as they wish to call it, the laws that are being passed to search your homes and no privacy left, taking away your privacies, forcing you to buy this or that. All of these things are a work of Satan to create the incontentance that we see today, the hate and the misery that makes life to where people don't want to live. And of course, along with this, you see the pilot who is flying the plane, 16-year veteran pilot, and all of a sudden he goes crazy with his hands on the wheel of a plane. What if he had it on a nuclear bomb, the wheels of a nuclear bomb? And see, this is what I've told you now for years. We see the autism, yes, we see that readily. We see children that's very much deformed. What we don't see is we don't see the things that are eating away the brain tissue or the cells that keep the brain separated and functioning. I know that you know by now over the years that the human body is not just one. It's made up of trillions, or you couldn't number them with trillions. It's made up of many, many trillions of cells that each one play a part to make your eyes see, your tongue talk, your lungs breathe, makes your legs walk, your feet walk, makes your feet smell even. I mean, all of these things are taking place in your body that makes your body a being that can operate. We see the same thing in the earth and the atmosphere, and we see a being that's in command of this right now, that created the heavens and the earth, and made mankind to operate. And then after his lifespan was up, he would disappear from sight, but he would still be resurrectable, and the same enzymes that was making him a living, walking being in the first place would still be there to make him again, to bring him back to life and give him his body back again. Now, if you can get that in your mind, and then remember all the sermons I've brought on the atmosphere, the firmament, what Yahweh calls the firmament. Now, He made the heavens, that is, in the beginning of mankind's plan, or beginning of Yahweh's work, His planned work, that we'll get it a little bit deeper in to make you understand that fully. But in the beginning of Yahweh's plan and the work of bringing it about, He created heavens far out on the end of a Milky Way. If you've ever looked at the universe, maybe if you got a astrology book, I wouldn't get into it too deep, astronomy, but you could see that the earth is way out on the end, almost separate from the universe. It's almost like it doesn't even have any part to do with the universe. It's so far away from the main part of the universe, or the edge of the universe, as science now knows. We're outside of the edge of the universe, and the real universe, the big one, they're saying now that there's probably trillions of planets, and maybe some like the earth. Of course, they don't know. They're looking for one, so they can go there and start a war. Running out of room here to start wars, getting too dangerous. But if you can imagine him creating now out here way out away from the universe where space makes safe, and him creating the earth and then heavens to govern the earth. And this heavens that is governing the earth run like a clock. And it makes the hands inside this clock, every piece is going at a certain speed, a tic-tac, that makes the second hand move to seconds, and the big hand move to certain speed, and the small hand move to a certain speed. And it keeps everything in order. Now, in the atmosphere or firmament and the earth, Yahweh says by one prophet, he said, I laid out the foundation of the earth, and he didn't call it firmament in that place, but that's what it meant, atmosphere. And he said, when I give command, they all rise up to answer me. So if you can imagine now this being that created this body of trillions and trillions of little bitty bugs that you can't see, you could put 10,000 on the head of a pin and you still couldn't see them, all crammed in together. Now you can see the body, but you can't see it working. You can see the heavens, you can't see it working, but you know what it's doing for you. It gives you rain and snow and warmth and water and so forth. You can see what it's doing, but it's way out there, and man is yet to even get to the edge of the heavens that control the earth. But we're trying. That is, our scientists are trying. If you go back to Genesis now, so Yahweh has this plan, and Satan is, her face is set. Her face is set. If you could remember Yeshua's writings when he said this, when he said his face was set to go to Jerusalem. Well, that included his plans to leave Galilee and go to Jerusalem and get another portion of Yahweh's work done. Well, Satan's face is set in a different direction, but the plan is, right here, it's shown. First part here, he created the heavens and the earth, and then verse 26, he says, and Yahweh said, I will make man in my image according to my likeness, and they will have authority. Well, Yeshua is the first to receive that authority. The woman qualified for it, but she hasn't received it. She's dead, along with all the others, saints that died before her, and we will resurrect her. But the authority, she's qualified for it, and will receive it because of the last part of her life. She deeply repented, turned to a work showing her conversion, because her works, your works prove what's going on in your mind, your desires and your hopes and everything. Your work proves it. And out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And that's exactly what she did. And she worked not only with Yeshua, but She was prophesied to work with those afterwards and did work with the apostles after the work of Yahshua, after his ascension back to heaven. Well, here we see that that's the purpose of Yahweh. And we see the last portion of this work taking place today. In Yochanan 1 and verse 1, we see what's spoken of in Genesis. I will make mankind in my image, and then I will give him authority. Then in Yochanan 1, verses 1 and 2, he says, the apostle was inspired to write, in the beginning was the plan. You could change that to work if you wanted to, and it might be that you'd understand it better if you did. But in the beginning was the plan of Yahweh, and the plan was with Yahweh, and the plan was Yahweh's. My plan is to make mankind in my image, man and woman, mankind. And they can't function without each other. That's the way you were made, to function with each other. The same plan was in the beginning with Yahweh. Now, this plan or work, if you look over with that in mind, look over to chapter 6 now, and maybe this will help you to understand what Yahshua was saying here in chapter 6 and verse 29. When a man comes to him and said, what must we do? Verse 28, what must we do that we might work the works of Yahweh, or help fulfill the plan of Yahweh? And Yahshua says the first thing to do, he answered and said to them, this is the work of Yahweh. This is the work that he is doing, to make people believe in the one he has sent. That is part of the plan of Yahweh, or part of the work of Yahweh. To have the works broken up into different stages of history, here a little and there a little, and each one contributing his part to the overall plan that will actually bring forth a super kingdom that will take sin totally out of the universe. With Yahshua and that woman being perfect examples of this plan. Now, that was in chapter 6 and verse 29. This is part of that work. Now, the one sent in these last days, if you go over and keep these different works now in mind, because go over to chapter 10 of Revelation. Now, he started in Genesis and said, this is the way I'm going to make man. Then in each stage of history, he brought that plan a little closer to perfection. In Yahshua's time, he had men and women who brought forth Yahshua, trained Yahshua. Now that was part of the stage of that plan or work that he's bringing forth, guarding, working to keep it guarded. Then he brings forth this high priest that represents the kingdom that he gave back here in Moshe's day, laid out in detail to Moshe. The priest never fulfilled it. They never became a priest without sin, and that, of course, they saw this. They first had to offer a sacrifice for their sins, their own sins, on this altar with 4 horns that represents the quartet today, because the quartet is the finishing of this work or plan, planned from the beginning to allow this huge slaughter to take place. So what we're seeing build up now is the finishing of this prophesied slaughter that is going to prove to mankind what sin brings. The least little bit of sin brings. You never hear of that woman sinning after that. In fact, her job, I mean, she was forever seeking to help others. That was her total life after that. She was a worker before that, but it was to a point to where she saw nothing righteous coming forth from the world. This is what you see in the world today. She wasn't for sure that anything would come forth and that the prophecies may not be fulfilled, but she had hopes. And of course, when she saw that hope being fulfilled in Yeshua, she knew the Scripture, so you can tell her heart was really in seeing that plan fulfilled, this work of Yahweh fulfilled. So instantly, she turned and said, "This is it." She didn't look back. It's hard to forget about your past sins, but you have repented of them. The thing to do now is put it behind you, forget it, because you've repented, you're converted over to Yahweh's work, as she did, converted totally to Yahweh's work, and bringing forth this perfect kingdom, which she had a big part in playing in what we're reading right now. In fact, she was instrumental in bringing this message that I'm bringing you, in bringing it about. Praise Yahweh. Well, now, back to, remember this now, and Yeshua was saying, this is the work now that you believe into the one sent. That is, into, as she was. She showed what into means. She got deeply in the work of Yahweh and followed this man for 2 years, the Scripture showed. Followed him for 2 years before he died and was there all the way helping him stop this now. I know my time is up, but let's go just a little further here, because now we're in the end of the work here. And this is the remnant that the prophets spoke of, that is early as Genesis, the prophets spoke of this. And then the apostles spoke of it and saying there's still a remnant after us that's going to have to do a work. Well, we see it spelled out here in Revelations 10. Revelations 10. And we see the finishing part of this work is done right here. The finishing part, if you'll see. But in the days of the voice of the seventh Malach, when he will begin to sound. Now, I brought you many sermons going back and showing you that this seventh trumpet, or seventh Malach, seventh messenger, is it. It's the last lamp shown on the seven-lamp lampstand. That is also shown in the beginning of Revelations here. And notice when he speaks, when he begins to sound, the great secrets of Yahweh will be finished. That's the finishing work. Now, if you go on down to verse 11, he says, you must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and languages and kings. Well, if you look to the next chapter, you'll see who he's speaking of. In verse 3, 11 verse 3, and I will give, to do this work, I will give to my 2 witnesses to perform their prophesied 7th work. This is it, the end of it. We're in it right now. These are the 2 olive trees. These are the lampstands, the last 2 lamps of the lampstand. This is it. This is the last part of the work of Yahweh. And praise Yahweh. I was hoping to get further than this into this work today, but we'll I think that'll get enough to where we can know what we're doing this Yahshua's memorial when we celebrate. And this is the first time we've ever done it right, but we will celebrate this memorial to this woman. Praise Yahweh. And this woman too, I want to assure you, it didn't be she didn't just begin in Yahshua's time. She was prophesied by the prophets. One of the prophecies, I won't take too much away from the great Yahuda, that's going to. He says he has 300 scriptures, and I said, well, I'm going to give you 30 minutes to cover all of them, David. He's back there right now. He didn't know I could see him, but I can. But anyway, this is one of the prophecies. It's so comical because, as you know, we have an abundance of goat milk, and of course we have the goat cheese, and one of these prophecies, a prophecy of this woman, a prophecy of you, the donkeys, and me, the branch. They're all combined together. But now get this. This is a little thing, that Yahweh, he does this. He throws these little things in just to let you know he's aware of what he is bringing about himself. And he said in that time period, and David will bring this out, I won't cover it any more than what I'm doing, but he says in that time period, when this woman is celebrated like she's supposed to be memorialized, you will have abundance of goat milk. I said, what group of people other than the House of Yahweh, reestablished in these last days, would fit that prophecy right there? I think they heard me in Abelin when I was praising Yahweh for that scripture right there. But abundance of goat milk in that time period when this woman, Yahshua, and Yahweh are all praised together, with your works now backing it up to prove it, as her works backed her up. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services over to the next speaker. I love you.